a second chance at 65. The silence in the house had become almost tangible. Not the cozy silence of evening reading by lamplight, but a kind of ringing, oppressive emptiness that seemed to have seeped into every corner after Richard's funeral. I sat on the edge of our bed, now just mine, and stared at his slippers, still sitting by the nightstand. 43 years of marriage, and now even the sound of the refrigerator seemed too loud. I'm Margaret Elizabeth Wilson, 65 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't know what to do tomorrow morning. Richard always woke up first, made coffee, read the news on his tablet, a habit he picked up in recent years, though I still preferred the paper. Now the tablet lay on his nightstand, screen dark, and I didn't even know his password. The kids called every day. Jessica from California suggested I move in with her and my son-in-law. Michael from Boston insisted on assisted living. Such wonderful facilities, Mom. You'll make new friends. My granddaughter Emily sent messages with heart emojis and offered to teach me how to hang out on social media so I wouldn't be bored. Everyone wanted to help, and everyone thought they knew what was best for me. But nobody asked what I wanted. Maybe because I didn't know myself. On that rainy October day, I decided to tackle Richard's study. Not because I was ready, but because I couldn't bear his scent anymore. That mixture of old leather books and his cologne that still lingered in the room. I started with his desk, carefully organizing documents that needed to go to the lawyer. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old tax returns, I found a worn notebook with a soft cover. My name was written on the title page in the handwriting of a 24-year-old girl. Angular, hurried, full of hope. I opened it and froze. Margaret's Bakery Plan, 1982. Good heavens, I'd completely forgotten about this notebook. Page after page revealed my long-forgotten dream. Equipment lists, recipes, interior sketches, even a sample menu. Homemade pies like Grandma's, sourdough bread, special cupcakes for special days. In the margins, I'd drawn my future bakery storefront. Cozy, with beautiful shelves where fragrant pastries sat on lace doilies. I remembered that evening when I'd written this business plan. Richard had just gotten promoted at the bank. We'd moved into this house in Wilmington, Delaware. Jessica had started first grade, and Michael was still crawling around in diapers. I had a degree in home economics. I baked beautifully. Grandma Rose had taught me, and I dreamed of my own business. But then Richard said it wasn't serious, that a bakery was a whim, that we had a stable life, a good family, why risk it? That his salary was enough, and I should focus on the children and home. I agreed then. What young wife in the 80s would have argued with her banker husband? I flipped through more pages and found even more details. I'd even calculated the initial investment. $20,000. A huge sum for us then. Now it seemed laughable. Richard's insurance, selling his stocks, our savings. I had far more money than I could spend in my remaining years. The doctor at my last checkup said I had excellent health for my age. Mom lived to 91. Grandma Rose to 87. I could have another 20, maybe 25 years ahead of me. What would I do with all that time? Watch television, play bridge with the neighbors, visit the kids once a month while they politely put up with me? I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. My heart was beating as if I were that young woman again, full of plans. What if now was the time? I had money, I had time, and honestly, I had nothing left to lose. That night, I fell asleep without sleeping pills for the first time in a month. I woke up with a feeling I'd forgotten, anticipation for the day ahead. Over breakfast, I reread my old plan and realized how much the world had changed in 40 years. Nobody bought bread just from bakeries anymore. There were huge supermarkets, Starbucks on every corner. People ordered food online. But maybe that's exactly why real homemade baking had become even more precious. I sat down at Richard's computer. I'd learned to use it over the years, though he always teased me about my two-finger typing. On Google Maps, I studied our town center. Wilmington had changed over the decades. Many old shops had closed, but new cafes, art galleries, and antique stores had opened. The area was becoming trendy, with young families moving in from Philadelphia and even New York. On Market Street, I found several available spaces. One particularly caught my attention, a corner building with large windows where an old-fashioned pharmacy used to be. I wrote down the realtor's phone number. Calling was scary. What would I say? That a 65-year-old widow wanted to open a bakery? But I dialed the number, and a melodic voice answered almost immediately. The realtor's name was Brittany. By her voice, she was 25, maybe 30 at most. We arranged to meet at 2 o'clock at the building. I spent a whole hour choosing what to wear. I wanted to look serious, like a businesswoman, but not too stern. I settled on a navy pantsuit and pearl necklace, classics that never go out of style. Brittany turned out to be even younger than I'd thought, a slender blonde in a bright pink blouse and shoes with incredible heels. She smiled professionally and clearly tried to hide her surprise when I said I was interested in the space for a bakery. The building was bigger inside than it looked from the street. High ceilings, good lighting, a separate street entrance. I could already see where the display case would go, where the tables for people wanting coffee with pastry would be. In the back, there was plenty of room for a kitchen and storage. Brittany talked about utilities and rent while I listened and mentally arranged furniture. Yes, this space would work. More than that, it was perfect. When we stepped outside, I noticed there was a bookstore next door. Not a chain store. Small, independent, with a hand-painted sign. Frank's Books and More. The window was filled with old and new books, with amusing figurines and small potted plants scattered between them. A sign on the door welcomed everyone, even if they just wanted to chat. While Brittany typed something on her phone, I stepped closer. Deep in the store, behind the counter, sat a man about my age. He was reading a book, occasionally adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses. Graying beard, plaid shirt, kind crinkles around his eyes. He looked exactly like an independent bookstore owner should look. Our eyes met through the glass, and he waved. I blushed and quickly turned away. On the drive home, I thought not only about the bakery, but about how pleasant it would be to see the book-selling neighbor every morning. How long had it been since I'd noticed men? Probably 20 years at least. Richard had been jealous, and I'd gotten used to not noticing others. But now, at home, I got out the calculator and started figuring. Rent, equipment, initial supplies, licenses, insurance, employee wages. The sum was substantial, but not frightening. I had the money. More importantly, I had a purpose. That evening, I tried baking my signature chocolate cupcakes. I knew the recipe by heart. Grandma Rose had passed it to me, and her mother's grandmother had passed it to her. I always added my secret ingredient, a pinch of cinnamon and a drop of vanilla extract. The result was what Richard used to call cupcakes you can't stop eating. While the cupcakes baked, I called Jessica in California. My daughter listened to my plans in complete silence. Then came a long sigh. She started talking about how this was very hard work, that I'd have to get up at 5 in the morning and be on my feet all day. I reminded her that I wasn't a feeble old woman and had gotten up at 5:30 my whole life to make breakfast for her father. Jessica kept insisting, "This is business, Mom. Taxes, employees, competition." I had to explain that I had an education and nobody had taken away my brains. Another sigh. Jessica was a lawyer. She was used to analyzing everything and looking for pitfalls. She asked what would happen if it didn't work out. What if I lost money? I looked at my empty house, at Richard's chair, at his slippers I still couldn't bring myself to put away. I answered her question with a question. What if it worked out? The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur. I submitted the rental application, contacted equipment suppliers, started figuring out licenses and permits. Each day brought new discoveries about how the business world had changed. What scared me most were modern technologies. It turned out that without an internet presence, no small business could survive nowadays. I needed a website, social media accounts, an online ordering system. When a marketing consultant, a girl Emily's age, started explaining Instagram stories and Google My Business to me, my head started spinning. I had to call my granddaughter. Emily was studying at college in Maryland and had always been patient with my technical questions. When she heard about my plans, she squealed with excitement so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Emily said this was so cool, and I'd be the coolest entrepreneur in the family. She came for the weekend and brought her laptop, tablet, and youthful enthusiasm. We spent all Saturday evening at the kitchen table, creating my first Instagram account. Emily explained that the main thing was beautiful photos and sincerity. People love stories. I needed to tell why I decided to open a bakery at 65. I watched her fingers glide skillfully across the screen and felt like an archaeologist studying alien technology. I asked what to write. Emily said to write honestly. What I felt, what I planned, show the process. People love behind-the-scenes glimpses. In an hour, we'd created an account for the bakery. Emily said Margot sounded more modern than Margaret. The first post was a photo of my hands kneading bread dough, with a caption about starting a new chapter of life at 65. Soon, a bakery would open in Wilmington, where every item would be made with love and family recipes. By Sunday evening, I had 30 followers and lots of hearts under my photos. Emily was thrilled. She said people were responding positively, and when I opened, she'd do a professional photo shoot for my website. Monday brought new bureaucratic complications. At City Hall, they explained that a bakery needed special health department permits. At the health department, that I needed a commercial kitchen with specific equipment. At the equipment company, that installation would take at least 3 weeks after ordering. I sat in my car in the City Hall parking lot and felt my enthusiasm evaporating. Maybe the kids were right. Maybe this was too complicated for a woman my age. But then I remembered how Richard always said, if something worthwhile were easy, everyone would do it. I straightened my shoulders, started the car, and drove home to make an action plan. That evening, I decided to walk through downtown to better study my bakery's future surroundings. Market Street was surprisingly busy for a weeknight. Young families with children, elderly couples, students with laptops and coffee shops. I stopped in front of the bookstore. Warm light glowed in the window, and I could see the same man behind the counter. This time, he was talking with a customer, a middle-aged woman with a large stack of books. When the customer left, the store owner came out to the porch to water the potted flowers. Seeing me, he smiled and said hello. He introduced himself as Frank Morris and asked if I was going to be their new neighbor. I nodded, feeling myself blush. When was the last time I blushed because of a man? I introduced myself as Margaret Wilson and said I was planning to open a bakery if I could handle all the formalities. His eyes lit up. He said this was wonderful, that his customers constantly asked where they could get decent coffee with homemade baking. All these chained coffee shops were like hospital food compared to what our grandmothers used to make. We talked for almost an hour. It turned out Frank had been widowed 3 years ago. His bookstore had been running for 15 years, and before that he'd been a high school history teacher. He had 2 grown sons living in other states, and like me, he was learning to live alone again. Frank shared that the hardest thing wasn't loneliness itself, but the lack of purpose. When you have a family, you know why you get up in the morning. But then, he didn't finish, but I understood. We walked down the emptying street, and I felt surprisingly comfortable with this man. I asked if the bookstore didn't give him purpose. He said it did, but it wasn't the same as building something new. I had decided to start from scratch at 65, and that took courage. I laughed and said it might be recklessness. Frank noted that at our age, was there really a difference? November flew by in an endless series of meetings with contractors, suppliers, and officials. Each day brought new surprises. The electrical wiring was the wrong capacity. Additional ventilation was required. Health regulations had changed since last year. But gradually, the empty space was transforming into a real bakery. First, they installed an industrial-sized stove, a stainless steel beauty that could bake 24 loaves of bread at once. Then came the ovens, refrigeration units, dough mixer. Every morning, I came to the construction site with a thermos of coffee and homemade sandwiches for the workers. Mike, the foreman, initially treated me condescendingly, an elderly lady playing at businesswoman. But when he tried my oatmeal raisin cookies, his attitude changed. He said if I baked like this, I'd have lines to the ocean. I photographed every stage of construction for Instagram. Emily taught me to add hashtags and location tags, and my follower count slowly but steadily grew. People wrote comments, asked questions about the future menu, wished me luck. One woman even offered to be my first customer. Frank stopped by almost every day, first under the pretext of checking on the work progress, then just to have coffee and chat. We talked about everything: books, our late spouses, how the world had changed over recent decades. One evening, when the workers had already left, and I'd stayed late making a list of needed supplies, Frank brought me a sandwich and hot soup from the neighboring cafe. He noticed that I was forgetting to eat, and that wouldn't do. We dined by the light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, sitting on overturned crates, and I felt surprisingly happy. When was the last time I'd felt this way with a man? Not as a wife fulfilling marital duties, but as a woman who enjoyed conversation. Frank shared his thoughts. He thought I needed a good coffee machine. People nowadays couldn't go anywhere without coffee. I objected that I'd planned a simple drip coffee maker, but he insisted I needed espresso, cappuccino, the works. He had a friend who sold used restaurant equipment, good machines for reasonable prices. That's how my bakery got a professional Italian coffee machine, a gleaming monster with multiple levers and gauges that scared me to death. Frank volunteered to teach me how to use it. He explained that in his youth, he'd worked as a bartender to pay for college. Coffee is chemistry plus a little magic. We spent an entire evening learning to make proper cappuccino. I ruined milk, burned espresso, but Frank patiently explained again and again. By the end of the evening, I'd managed something resembling decent coffee, and we both had caffeine-shaky hands. Frank promised we'd try latte art tomorrow. I watched his hands, strong despite his age, with long pianist's or artist's fingers, and realized I was falling in love. At 65, can you imagine? Like a schoolgirl. December was cold and snowy. Construction dragged on. Suppliers were delayed by weather. Then heating problems were discovered. I was getting nervous. I'd planned to open before Christmas to catch the holiday wave. But deadlines kept shifting. The kids came for Thanksgiving, and for the first time in months, I saw their reaction to my plans in person. Jessica walked through the unfinished bakery with the expression of a lawyer examining a crime scene. She reminded me that I understood what I was getting into. The insurance premiums alone cost more per month than I used to spend in 6 months. Michael was more direct. He said it wasn't too late to return everything. Sell the equipment, cancel the lease. Nobody would judge me. Emily, on the other hand, was thrilled. She spent the whole evening photographing the bakery for Instagram, coming up with captions, planning the opening promotion campaign. She marveled that I already had 400 followers, and we hadn't even opened yet. An argument broke out over dinner. Jessica and Michael presented reasonable arguments against. Emily hotly defended my plans, and I listened silently, thinking that I knew my children better than they thought. Jessica was afraid for me. She'd been the responsible older daughter her whole life, and the thought that Mom might fail, or worse, damage her health, terrified her. Michael simply couldn't imagine that his mother was capable of independent business. To him, I'd forever remain the housewife who provided family comfort while Dad earned the money. After dinner, when the kids went to watch football, I sat in the kitchen washing dishes. Emily was drying plates and suddenly asked if I was scared. I thought about it. Was I scared? I answered her honestly. I was scared every day. Scared I wouldn't manage, that I'd lose money, that I'd become a laughingstock. But even more, I was scared of spending the rest of my life regretting not trying. She hugged me with wet hands, ignoring the soapy foam. She said she was proud of me, seriously. Her friends in college think life ends after 30, and I was showing that you can start over at any age. That night, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, but not from anxiety, from anticipation. Tomorrow, Frank was going to help me with final preparations for opening. The day after tomorrow, the health inspector was coming. And in a week, if everything went well, I'd become a business owner for the first time in my life. The last week before opening flew by in chaos. The health inspector turned out to be a meticulous middle-aged man who checked every corner of the bakery. Fortunately, everything met regulations, and I got the long-awaited permit. Frank helped me arrange the furniture. We chose a vintage style, round tables with marble tops, Viennese-style chairs, dark wood shelves for the display case. I found all this at antique shops and sales, spending half what new furniture would have cost. Frank noticed that I had a talent for design. Margot's Sweet Dreams looked like a place where you'd want to spend all day. I stepped back a few steps to evaluate the result. The bakery really turned out cozy. Warm lighting, lace doilies on tables, fresh flowers in simple glass vases, old photos of Wilmington and portraits of my family hung on the walls. including the famous photo of Grandma Rose in her own kitchen from the 1940s. Saturday evening, I decided to do a test bake. I needed to check how the equipment worked at full capacity and prepare stock for Monday, opening day. I started at 5 in the morning, as I planned to do every day. First, sourdough bread. I'd been growing the starter for 3 weeks, feeding it every day like a pet. Emily laughed that I'd gotten a new pet. Then came the cupcakes. Chocolate, lemon, blueberry. While they baked, I kneaded croissant dough. This technique was hardest for me. I had to roll and fold the dough with butter many times, creating a layered structure. By noon, the bakery was filled with aromas that made my head spin. Frank stopped by around 1 and froze in the doorway. He said it smelled absolutely magical. Pure magic. I treated him to a still warm croissant with homemade raspberry jam. He closed his eyes, took a bite, and made a sound more suited to wine tasting. Frank noted that if everything was this quality, I'd need to hire security for the crowds of customers. All day, neighbors dropped by the bakery, drawn by the smells. The florist from across the street brought a bouquet as an opening gift. The music store owner offered to set up speakers and a jazz playlist. The hairdresser from the salon across the street ordered a birthday cake for her daughter. I felt a community forming around the bakery. And that was even more important than financial success. That evening, when I was washing the last baking sheets, Emily came with 2 friends from college. The girls were thrilled with the interior and couldn't tear themselves away from the pastry display. Emily asked if they could do a photo shoot here tomorrow for Instagram. This place was so beautiful. I didn't quite understand what beautiful meant in their language, but I nodded. Emily and her friends spent the whole evening photographing themselves with croissants and cappuccinos, coming up with hashtags and planning how to promote my bakery on social media. Late that night, when everyone had left, I was alone in my bakery. I walked between the tables, straightened the doilies, wiped the display case once more. Tomorrow, my first real customers would be here. Tomorrow I'd find out if I'd been right to take this chance at 65. I turned on the coffee machine, made myself a small espresso, and sat at the corner table, the one I'd chosen for myself. From here I could see the whole bakery and a bit of the street through the window. 40 years ago, I dreamed of exactly this. And now, after a whole lifetime, my dream had become reality. Monday, December 18th. I woke up at 4 in the morning without an alarm, from excitement and anticipation. It was still dark outside, light snow was falling, and Wilmington streets were sleeping. But I had the most important day of my life ahead of me. First, shower and coffee at home, then a quick drive to the bakery. By 5, I was already turning on the ovens and taking out dough that had been rising all night. Bread went into the oven first, then croissants, plain, chocolate, almond. Next came cupcakes, cinnamon rolls, shortbread cookies. By 7, the display case was full, and the bakery was filled with an aroma that made even my mouth water. Emily arrived at 7:30 with a huge bouquet and 3 photographer friends. She said they'd create such content that all of Wilmington would know about my bakery. The girls spent an hour shooting every corner, every pastry, me at work. Then they posted everything to Instagram stories and regular posts with dozens of hashtags. Half an hour later, my phone started buzzing with notifications. At 8 in the morning, I opened the door for my first customers. My heart was beating so hard, I was afraid all of Wilmington could hear it. Frank was my first customer. He bought a croissant with raspberry jam and a large coffee to go, paid with a $10 bill, and told me to keep the change as a tip. He wished me luck and added that if anything went wrong, he'd be nearby. Next came the florist and her assistant. After them, a young mother with a stroller who ordered coffee and 2 cupcakes for energy. Then an elderly couple who spent half an hour choosing between lemon pie and chocolate cake and ended up taking both. By 10 in the morning, there was a small but steady line in the bakery. People bought coffee and pastries to go. Some sat at tables. I could barely keep up serving everyone, working the coffee machine, warming pastries. Around noon, a group of young mothers with children came in. The little ones pressed against the display case, pointing at colorful cupcakes. One of the moms said she'd seen the bakery on Instagram and decided to check if it was as delicious as it was beautiful. After trying a croissant, she noted these were the best croissants she'd eaten outside of France and ordered 2 more to go. After lunch, there was a small lull, and I could catch my breath. I counted the morning's revenue. The figure exceeded my most optimistic projections. But the main thing wasn't the money, but people's faces. I saw how they smiled tasting my baking, how their eyes lit up from the smell of fresh bread. That evening, Jessica and Michael came. They'd flown in from California and Boston specifically for the opening, though until the last moment, they'd said this was madness. Jessica ordered a cappuccino and carrot cupcake, was quiet for a long time while tasting. Then she looked at me seriously and said she'd been wrong. This really was a special place. Michael was more reserved, but I could see how carefully he studied the interior, observed customers, evaluated the flow of clients. Finally, he noted that the location was good and the product quality was excellent. If things continued like this, I had every chance of success. That was almost a compliment from my skeptical son. At 8 in the evening, I closed the bakery and tallied the day's results. 130 items sold. Revenue of $800. But the main thing, in one day I'd gained 24 regular customers and the feeling that I'd finally found my place in life. Frank helped clean up and wash dishes. We worked silently, but it was the comfortable silence of people who understand each other without words. When we finished, Frank said he wanted to say something. I turned to him, and he took my hands in his. Frank confessed that these months we'd known each other had changed his life. He'd thought all the best was behind him, that all that remained was to live out his days. But then I appeared with my dreams and plans, and he realized life was just beginning. He leaned down and kissed me, carefully, tenderly, as if I were made of the finest porcelain. I closed my eyes and felt the last ice around my heart melting. Ice that had been building up through years of loneliness in marriage. 6 months had passed since the bakery's opening, and life had changed dramatically. Margot's Sweet Dreams had become a magnet for the whole neighborhood. In the morning, business people came for coffee and croissants. During the day, young mothers with children. In the evening, students with laptops and couples in love. I had to hire an assistant, Sarah, a young woman after divorce who was looking for a new beginning, just like I once had. She turned out to be a talented baker and quickly learned my recipes. Now I could spend more time talking with customers and developing new items. The bakery's Instagram account gained 3,000 followers. Emily regularly came to shoot new content, and the local newspaper wrote an article about me with the headline, grandmother who made her dream come true at 65. But the most important change was my relationship with Frank. We didn't rush, didn't make grand declarations, just enjoyed each other's company. He often stayed to help me close the bakery. We'd have dinner together, walk through evening Wilmington, talk about books, dreams, about all the different ways you can live a life. The kids gradually accepted my new circumstances. Jessica even brought colleagues from her California law firm on a culinary tour of the East Coast, and my bakery was the first stop. Michael started consulting with me about investments. It turned out I had a good head for small business finances. One evening in May, when Frank and I were sitting in the empty bakery at our favorite corner table, he pulled out a small box. Frank said he was 70. I was 65. We didn't have time for long courtships and doubts. He wanted to spend all his remaining years with me. He asked if I would marry him. The ring was simple, white gold with a small diamond, elegant and understated. Exactly what I would have chosen myself. I looked at this man, kind, intelligent man who'd supported my crazy venture from day one, and realized at 65 I'd gotten not only a new business, but true love. Of course, I said yes. We married in September, in a small church in downtown Wilmington. Jessica was my maid of honor. Michael walked me down the aisle. Emily filmed everything for our family archive. Frank's sons flew in from California and Texas. After the ceremony, we held the reception right in the bakery, decorated with flowers and garlands. I baked the cake myself, of course, 3 tiers with lemon cream and fresh flowers. When we cut it, 80-year-old Mr. Johnson from the neighboring house called out a toast to new beginnings, and everyone raised their champagne glasses. We spent our honeymoon in Italy, studying traditional bread and pastry recipes. Frank spoke Italian, another talent I discovered. We traveled through small Tuscan towns, learned from local bakers, bought rare ingredients. In one village near Florence, we met Signora Francesca, who was 85 and still baked bread for the whole village every morning. She taught me to make special bread with olives and rosemary, a recipe that had been passed down in her family for 3 centuries. As we parted, she told me that bread is life, and life never ends as long as you have something to give people. Today, I'm 68 years old, and I wake up every morning at 5 o'clock with a smile. Margot's Sweet Dreams has become not just a bakery, but a community center. We hold cooking classes for children, book club meetings, that was Frank's idea, birthdays and small family celebrations. Sarah became my business partner, and we opened a second location in the neighboring town. After college, Emily decided to go into marketing for small businesses and now manages accounts for several local establishments. Jessica and Michael no longer consider my business a win. They're proud of me, and that means everything. But most importantly, I'm proud of myself. At an age when many are preparing for sunset, I built a new life from scratch. Frank still works at his bookstore, but now spends half his time at the bakery, helping me with administrative tasks and entertaining customers with stories about books and life. We live in my house, but we've turned it into a real family home where it always smells like fresh baking and coffee. Sometimes, late in the evening, when the bakery is closed and we're sitting at our corner table, I think about how easy it would have been to choose a different path. Sell the house, move in with the kids, humbly live out my days as a grandmother and widow. But I chose my dream. At 65, I decided that life was just beginning, and I was right. On the bakery wall hangs a photo of Grandma Rose in her 1940s kitchen. Next to it, my photo working at Margot's Sweet Dreams. 3 generations of women, each finding her own way to bring people joy through food and care. And in the display case sits a sign Emily gave me that says it's never too late to bake your dreams. And that's the absolute truth.